Hey guys, my name's Leon. I'm a psychotherapist and also a life coach. And in this video, I want to talk about social anxiety and paranoia. Often these things go together. I've been working with people with social anxiety for years, and I recently gave a workshop about this topic. I want to share that information with you. I personally had experienced severe social anxiety in my own past, and I've learned things to be able to overcome the paranoia that's related to that social anxiety. So something that you may experience is that you may think that people are talking about you or they're reacting to you in a certain kind of way that makes you feel like they are thinking about you. You fear that they may be judging you, and you might start to ask yourself, are these fears of mine automatic negative thoughts, or are they representative of reality? It may be difficult to tell. I want to share a bit of my own personal experience because I feel like that would be helpful for you. I've grown up with severe social anxiety, and that has continued into my adulthood, and paranoia had been a very integral part of it in a very negative kind of way. And I remember there was a period of my life in which I really wanted to challenge my social anxiety. So what I did is that I would go out to these social groups. But what happens is that once I arrive, I have all sorts of negative thoughts just running in through my head about what are these people thinking about me. And I often assume that they are rejecting me or that they're frowning at me. I may have that misperception that they're frowning at me. When I was in college, my social anxiety was paralyzing back then. And I remember when I got out of my dorm room, I'll kind of hold myself very stiffly because I'm afraid once I step out, I'm just living in fear of being judged. I'll refer back to these experiences when I'm talking about how can you deal with paranoia, because I've been able to feel that I've been able to address the paranoia that I've experienced very well. I have a history of perceiving that others are seeing me through a lens of rejection, and I want you to be able to overcome that yourself. Just going back to the example before of me trying to join the social groups, what happened back then was that the anxiety was so much that sometimes once I arrived to the group, I would leave it. So very soon after I arrived, I would escape from the group because of how bad the social anxiety was. Something that helped me to encourage myself to stay is to tell myself, I'm going to stay here for at least 30 minutes, right? Breaking it down like that makes things less overwhelming. If I tell myself I have to stay for the whole entire event, I don't want to go. But if I tell myself, just stay for 30 minutes just to see how it's like, it's helpful. And to go despite having those negative thoughts. One thing that you can't do is to prevent all those negative thoughts from showing up on your mind. If you live by trying to get rid of those negative thoughts, you're going to spend all your energy trying to do so. Not only that, the best way to not have those negative thoughts is to stop going to social events and stop challenging yourself. So if we focus and fixate on, I have to get rid of these negative paranoid thoughts, then that's not going to help us encourage ourselves to challenge ourselves. So what I learned to do was that when I go to a social event, to expect this cycle of negative thinking, of the paranoia that people are going to reject me, but I'm going to stay there for at least 30 minutes, because if I do so, what I could do then is to learn how to do some reality testing to see if those thoughts are true or not. The more I stay, the more I realize people are not rejecting me. They're talking with me. They're engaging with me. And sometimes people would invite me to do something else after a social event, or I even had the courage to ask them if they wanted to hang out, and things are fine. I want to go back to the college example because I think that's an important example. It has taught me the importance of exposure, because college really had forced me to be around a lot of people. I realized during the school year when I have to constantly be around other people, my social anxiety would get better. And during the breaks when I'm away, my ability to socialize would deteriorate, my social anxiety would get worse. So exposure is important to help facilitate that process of exposure. It's important to empathize with yourself, be able to watch and observe your thoughts, as well as tell yourself, I'm going to commit to socializing despite me having these thoughts. What really has helped me is when I'm having the cycle of thoughts to slow everything down, take a pause, ground myself. If I'm having those thoughts, I like to be able to ask myself, what are 5 things I could see, 4 things I could hear, and 3 things that I could touch? And that helps to kind of help ground myself when I'm kind of stuck in that negative thought spiral. And I notice and name what my thoughts are trying to say to me. And I get curious about them. I notice that this thought is playing in my mind. And when I do so, I become more of the observer of my thoughts. Thus, I know that I am not the thoughts themselves. Sometimes, like when you have social anxiety, these paranoid thoughts can seem very, very real. Next thing is that I do these ACT exercises. I ask myself, simply because my mind says this paranoia is true, does it make it true? I don't have to believe what it tells me. Simply because my mind tells me that this thing that's saying to me is important, it does not make it important. I don't have to follow or obey what my mind is trying to tell me. So this is very different from fighting your thoughts. You're letting those thoughts be there, but you are diffusing yourself from the grasp of those thoughts, becoming more of the observer of the thoughts rather than being one with the thoughts. Something I feel like is very valuable for people with social anxiety is to know that simply having a disturbing thought does not make that disturbing thought a threat. So we spend a lot of time trying to get rid of those disturbing paranoid thoughts. Simply because they exist, they are not a threat. And when you do so, that allows you to give space for that thought, so you can release that energy that you're using to fight that thought to doing what you want to do in your life, such as focusing on socializing or focusing on finding ways to enjoy life. I also like to ask myself, have I heard this thought before? Is it useful? Do I gain anything useful from it? Does it help me create the life that I want? And I remember to ask myself this question in a very kind and gentle, compassionate sort of way. The next thing to keep in mind is that your mind goes to where your focus is. So there's a useful workshop exercise that I would do with the workshops that I lead. And one is to look around the room and find the reds. So when I'm looking around the room right now, I'm noticing more and more things that are red in my room. And they start to stand out to me more and more. I notice even things that are slightly off of red, such as orange or pink. And those things start to stand out. So anxiety is the same thing. If you are focused on things that cause and produce anxiety and fixate on it, the more and more you're going to see it. The more and more you're going to see false positives. The anxious mind tends to misread the face. There is research to back that up. So they have a research study in which there's a neutral face that slowly becomes an angry face. And even when the face has not yet become an angry face, it's still a neutral face, the anxious person is going to immediately see that neutral face as being angry. So something that has helped me is to not be so self-focused, inwardly focused, but focus outwardly at the situation at hand. Because when I am self-focused, then I start to become self-conscious, and self-consciousness leads to more paranoid thoughts. So something that's helpful to know is that people are mainly thinking about themselves. Something that's helpful to do is to do reality testing. In order to do reality testing, it's important for you to stay with the social situation. For example, as I've mentioned before, when it comes to the social groups, for me to stay at least 30 minutes in the group. That gives you time to do reality testing rather than to trust your initial negative automatic thoughts that appear in your head. Instead of getting rid of those thoughts, what you do is that you allow being in that social situation to teach you what the reality of it is. Try to give the situation, the social situation, the benefit of the doubt. One way my social anxiety plays out is actually not in a social situation. It's when I have received emails in the past. Because when you have social anxiety, one thing that you do is you very much fear social judgment. So when I receive an email that appears to be angry, for example, then I start to be very anxious. What I've learned is that it's helpful for me to take a break and then return back to the email later at a later time. And what that teaches me is reality testing. I'm sticking with that situation more. I'm not sticking to my first interpretation of what that email is. And when I read it the second time, I realize actually this email is a neutral email. So that constant exposure allows for reality testing. You don't have to force yourself to stay with that email the first time. It's good to put things away and come back to it. Same thing with the social situation. As I said, I promised myself to stay there in 30 minutes. If I really don't like it, I could leave after 30 minutes. During the time I'm socializing, what I learned to do is that I could take breaks when I'm socializing and then come back to socializing. With this gentle approach, it allows me to stay with situations longer. Later on, I always go past 30 minutes when it comes to social situations. I'm able to challenge myself to stay for a much longer period of time. Practice being more of a curious scientist rather than to impulsively judge what is going on. Allow that first judgment to be there, but just stay with the situation. Be a curious scientist. Be open to what is going on. Have a sense of curiosity and wonder, and that is an antidote to having a reactive thinking. Something that was very helpful to me is to learn to balance out my intuition and be a little bit more like my mom. My mom would only believe things if she sees it literally. If she sees it's literally there, then she believes it. I feel like at times she takes it to an extreme. So what I'm advocating for is a more balanced approach. Me, on the other hand, I could be very intuitive about people, but the problem is that when that gets mixed up with social anxiety, that becomes self-consciousness, and that warps my intuition and ends up being a projection instead of reality. So by learning to practice, see it to believe it, I'm able to balance out that intuitive nature. And something that also helped me is to tell the difference between the intuitive mind, which works well, versus the anxious mind, which does not work well. So I said, I'm a very intuitive person, but that sometimes gets mixed up with my anxious mind. My intuitive mind is more calm and objective. It really takes its time. And notice my anxious mind tends to be very fast and tends to be very wordy and also self-conscious. So that's how I'm able to tell the difference. Something that has really helped me a lot with reality testing is the practice of journaling. So I would journal my social experiences and allow myself to free write, allow myself to express my genuine feelings about the social events. And I also write down how the social events went and how they turned out. And by being able to review my social events in this sort of way, looking back at my journal entries, I'm able to really see more what is the reality, what are the actual outcomes, and how do I tend to react and respond to things reflexively, and how can I be able to address that. It's been very much an aid with my social anxiety and paranoia to do journaling. So there's these times in which, you try out these different methods to be able to address your social anxiety and paranoia and doesn't seem to work. When it comes to these kind of times, what has been really helpful to me is to allow myself to have those negative thoughts and feelings, to almost like provide a safe container for myself to be able to experience and withdraw into myself and allow those thoughts and feelings to play out. Because sometimes if you try so hard to resist, it's not going to work. Sometimes you just really need to have your thoughts and feelings, and you need to step back from the social situation and be alone by yourself, and that's totally fine. The constant pressure to have to perform socially is not going to work for you. What that does is that afterwards, when I recover, I get a very strong experience knowing how's it like when I get into that very paranoid state of mind, and how it does not tend to be very helpful for me. And this has taught me, by contrast, that how much it's better for me usually to be able to be in a more present-oriented state of mind. It's important for me to focus on the social situation in a way, as I mentioned before, with curiosity and wonder, and find some ways to enjoy the experience. Maybe I'm finding something new about this person or new information, or for example, if I'm feeling so much pressure to socialize, maybe it's good for me to take a break from it rather than to force myself and just enjoy something else that's going on. Maybe the music that's playing in the background is nice, or just like watching and observing people is nice. That enjoyment is something that helps ground me, and enjoyment is a good antidote to fixating on the paranoia. If you try to push yourself too hard, you're going to associate social situations with negativity. You might start to focus on your paranoia as well. The final thing I want to say here is something that's been very helpful for me and also the people I work with, is to have perspective. Because yes, a lot of social anxiety is a projection of negative thoughts. The social anxiety often takes information and warps it and twists it to become paranoid thinking. That does not mean there's at times when people may be judging you in reality, right? So it's good to have perspective about your life. Even if you were judged, even if you were disliked, even if you can't, let's say hypothetically, you're not going to be able to enjoy a social event, can you still have perspective on your life regardless? Can you still find your life to be valuable, something that you can appreciate, even if these things were the case? You don't have to be someone who is completely liked by everyone. You don't have to perform well on every social situation, because if you do so, what you do is you place a lot of your value on every single interaction, and that becomes a terrible way for you to motivate yourself. It's exhausting in terms of your own morale. So I don't want you to place your whole worth on socializing. Have perspective on your life. Something that has helped me is to, if I hear people saying something negative about me, or if I'm imagining that they are, either case, what happens is that I kind of put what they say through a filter in my mind. And I realize I don't have to just absorb and take in what they say. I used to feel like I just need to absorb what people say about me. I don't have to absorb. I could chew on it and decide, is this valuable information for me, or can I convert this into useful information for me? If it's negative criticism, can I find the constructive criticism? Maybe the person's not giving me it in a constructive way, but what can I do for myself? And if it's very negative information, I don't have to absorb that information. So I hope you find this video to be helpful. If you do, click like and subscribe to support this channel. Thank you so much for watching.